This is the HP EliteBook 6930p, a business class machine from 2009. I made a video on this thing when I got it back in April of this year, and it was for one special reason, because this laptop was a brand new old stock laptop. It wasn't exactly one that I was overly looking for, but as I mentioned in that video, a new old stock laptop is a new old stock laptop. $75 for a 15-year-old laptop is a lot, so I figured that this thing should definitely be seeing some use in some way so that it's not completely just wasting money. I'm normally more into Dell Latitudes if it wasn't already clear. I've never had an HP EliteBook before, but I figured this is the perfect opportunity anyway. I'm still not exactly sure of the full specifics of how this whole situation happened, but as far as I'm aware, these were, I guess, bulk ordered by someone and then just never used. There's been these videos of these new old stock EliteBooks out there on YouTube already, and they all seem to have the same specs. This laptop would have shipped with a Core 2 Duo P8600 CPU from Intel, 4GB of DDR2 RAM, a 160GB hard drive, a DVD RW dual layer drive, ATI Mobility Radeon HD 3450 graphics, Intel wireless, and Windows XP Professional. Which honestly isn't really the worst thing ever for the time. This probably still would have been quite expensive when it was new. It also appears that this model came out in mid-2008. This one just happens to be a later model. Starting off with the feature tour, on the front of the laptop we have some status indicators that are kind of hidden because the lighting in this shot kind of sucks. We have one for Wi-Fi, power status, battery charge status, and hard disk activity. We also have an SD MMC slot, and the two speakers that are front-facing, and the latch to open the display, of course. On the right side of the laptop, we have a smart card slot, the aforementioned DVD RW dual layer drive with LightScribe capability, a single USB 2.0 port, a gigabit Ethernet port, and phone jack. On the back, we have a Kensington lock slot, the battery, the charge port, which on this laptop is the same connector as what Dell used back in the day, though it doesn't work with the Dell charger. And also we have a VGA port with the screws, because that's just what you would expect on a business laptop. On the left side of the laptop, we have the cooling vent, two more USB 2.0 ports, a mini 1394 port, an express card slot with the blank still in it, of course, and a headphone and a microphone jack. So nothing too crazy, but pretty much everything you would expect on a laptop of this size. There's not much room for a lot more I/O. Both the lid and the palm rest of this laptop are aluminum, so it looks and feels pretty good quality, especially considering that wasn't super common back in the day. And obviously it's still in pretty good condition. The only thing is that, at least in my case, it does kind of smudge like crazy. So despite my best efforts to keep it clean, sometimes it doesn't look pretty. Speaking of which, on the palm rest of the laptop we can see the indicator LEDs that have been extended out so it's a little easier to see them when the lid is open. We also have these spring-loaded holes for keeping the display closed instead of using a latch like most laptops. We also have the pretty small but expected trackpad for a laptop of this size, including its rubber buttons, which have been noted on these as being deteriorated because that's just what happens over time. Fortunately, despite them not looking that pretty on this one, they actually still are in pretty good condition. They're not sticky at all. It's just they don't look pretty. I don't know if they will stay that way, it kind of depends on how they hold up over time, but at least for the moment, I'm not overly in a rush to replace them. We also have the fingerprint sensor, always nice to have for a machine from this time, as well as the Windows Vista, Intel Centrino, and Energy Star stickers. Above that we have the keyboard, which is a pretty standard layout for a laptop of this size, except for this extra row of keys, which is something HP loved doing on everything back in this time. The keyboard's pretty good. I think the Latitude keyboards are better, and let's be honest, a ThinkPad keyboard from this time would probably blow both out of the water, but it's still pretty good. Above that we have the power button, a touch strip, which has an info center button for some HP piece of software, a wireless switch, a presentation mode button, and some volume indicators. And in between these two, there is also the caps lock and num lock LEDs, which you can't see unless they're turned on. Above that, of course, we have the 14-inch 1280 by 800 matte display. It's alright. This thing could have come with a 1440 by 900 screen, but honestly, this resolution for a laptop of this size is fine by my standards. It's not the brightest screen that I've ever seen. Sometimes it appears dimmer than it actually is because this thing has an ambient light sensor on it, which can control the brightness. I didn't know this when I first got this computer, which is why I was a bit surprised when the screen was as dark as it was. We also have a keyboard light. Instead of this thing having a backlit keyboard, HP has this keyboard light instead. This is something that I believe was on ThinkPads from this time as well. This machine doesn't have a webcam, but does have a microphone built in. And of course, there's also those little pegs that keep the display closed. I don't know what else to call them. On the bottom of the laptop, we have the battery that obviously is the original, came with the computer. It doesn't actually work. It's pretty much completely flat after sitting in a box for 15 years. I've left it in anyway because there's not really a reason to take it out. It's not bulging or anything. It's just doesn't seem to be able to hold a charge properly anymore. Underneath the battery, there's also a SIM card slot. There's also a docking base connector, though I don't have a docking station that works on this machine. And there's a little battery connector, which I would assume would maybe be part of a docking base, like battery expansion type thing, but I'm not aware of anything like that. Thankfully, there's at least a cover that keeps this closed if you aren't using it. There's also the cover for the mobile broadband card slot, which isn't equipped on this one. There's also access to one of the RAM DIMMs, in this case housing a 2GB stick of RAM. Presumably the other stick is soldered or it's like under the keyboard or something. And next to that, we have the spot for the hard drive, or in this case, the SSD. I've replaced the original hard drive with another one of those crucial M500 240GB drives. One of the things that this system is missing is there is no access to the CPU at all, which is annoying. There's the CPU intake up in the corner, but there's no access to the CPU, so you need to disassemble the machine for that. There's some other ventilation next to the hard drive and RAM. And there's also the HP information sticker, the Windows Vista Business product key, and lastly, a little card holder. Presumably you could put like a business card or something in there and it would be part of your laptop. There's also a little cover that hides the connector for a, according to HP, a Bluetooth device. So you can get at some stuff on the bottom. Personally, after coming off that Dell E6510 where you can get at pretty much everything with one screw, it's a little annoying that you do need to take this thing apart to get to A, the other RAM, assuming there is another RAM DIMM, and the CPU heatsink. Now it's time for the fun stuff. So when you fire the machine up, you can press escape to go into the boot startup whatever menu, where you get a lot of options. First of all, F1 for system information. Some notable things here include the warranty start date of 000000, the BIOS from March of 2009, the original to this system, the ATI video card BIOS from 2008, and the battery serial number from May of 2009. So the battery clearly is being detected at least somewhat, it's just that somewhere in there it doesn't seem to be able to charge. There's also F2 for system diagnostics, which seems pretty self-explanatory, F7 for HP spare key recovery, F9 for boot device options, and F10 for BIOS setup, which has a password on it for security reasons. It has to do with virtualization settings on this system. It's also definitely not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I should point out it's a graphical BIOS, so good job HP. But it's worth mentioning that because the battery's dead and the CMOS battery is dead, every time this computer loses power, the CMOS settings reset every time. We have a security tab, which I'm gonna be honest, has a lot of stuff that I am not qualified to talk about or explain. But this is where you can find the settings for the TPM security. This machine also has an option for disk sanitizer, which appears to securely erase data on a hard drive, which is pretty good to have in a BIOS. There's also a diagnostic section and, of course, the good stuff. In boot options, some of the highlights include being able to set a custom logo, presumably with some kind of software that HP would have provided. This machine also has an option to boot from SD card, which as somebody who only uses SD cards to write things instead of USB drives, I appreciate. The SATA device mode on this is set to AHCI. There's an option for secondary battery fast charge, which doesn't matter on this, since I can't even get the primary battery to work. An option for HP Quick Look 2, which I didn't know what it was at the time of recording, but it appears to be a similar kind of thing to the Latitude On reader system that was on the E6510 I just did a video on, where you can basically check emails and stuff without fully booting up your computer by pressing the info button. Also, this machine appears to have a UEFI boot option, though as it says here, it's not actually supported at all on this system, it's just for development purposes. But it's still kind of funny to see it there. And probably the last interesting thing of this BIOS is that there's an option to pretty much hide any option in the BIOS. Presumably if you don't want people changing things, you can set the security level for them to not show up. At least I think. I don't want to mess with this BIOS too much. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this system shipped with Windows XP Professional. I decided, however, to get the full 2009 experience by installing Windows 7 Professional on this computer instead. I decided to do a clean install and just put some of the HP garbage on it. Thanks to that SSD, this system boots pretty quickly, except for, as you can see on the logon screen, where there is a pretty big delay because of the HP Protect Tools software that is required for the fingerprint reader to work. But what can you do, I guess? I did experiment with both Windows 10 and 11 and several distros of Linux on this machine, but to make a long story very short, I found that Windows 7 just kind of runs the nicest on this system. A lot of modern operating systems don't really seem to play very nicely with it. I did attempt to install some of the HP software using the application disk that came with it though. One of those things includes the HP Protect Tools Security Manager, which doesn't really work that well. I should point out that the application disk that's shipped with these machines, at least if you have one of these new old stock EliteBooks, doesn't work on Windows 7. It's strictly only for XP, like it says on the disk. Some of the options in this program include drive encryption, the privacy manager, the device access manager, and the good stuff, the credential manager, and all the settings for the fingerprint reader, which also crashed the system. Some of the other things includes an HP Notebook PC accessory store for all the ways that you can give HP even more money. This machine also has a copy of InterVideo WinDVD, specifically WinDVD 8 SE, as well as the LightScribe control software, PDF Complete Special Edition, and a copy of Roxio Creator Business DVD whatever. So you can watch DVDs and create DVDs on this for all your real serious business work. In terms of things that I installed on this system, I had an old copy of Photoshop and Premiere Elements laying around since this system is pretty similar to that Dell XPS I reviewed a while ago. I figured I'd try it out on this system since it's pretty good hardware from the time, and while it probably wasn't supposed to be used this way, it actually does work pretty well at editing old videos from the day. Sometimes it's something I like trying on these old systems. Of course, no business machine is complete without an unnecessary copy of Microsoft Office on it, which I forgot to activate apparently. Whoops. And for the full 2009 experience, how about Microsoft Encarta? I don't know why I installed this on here, to be honest. This also has Windows Essentials 2011 on it, an old copy of VMware Workstation on this since I wanted to try virtual machines on it. It does them okay. Like I said, you need to set certain BIOS settings to be able to actually turn on virtualization technology. It involves enabling the TPM, if I remember correctly, which requires the BIOS password to be set. Despite this being a 15-year-old PC at this point, it can still do internet browsing, This is pretty much down to the processor since this thing has an SSD in it, but it does it pretty decently actually. And even playing back 720p 60 video is actually pretty good on this system. In fact, arguably better than the E6510 that I just did a video on, though that might be down to perhaps crappy Linux support on that system, or the fact that first gen Intel kind of sucks. It's not amazing, of course, but it's pretty good honestly, given how old this thing is. And the speakers aren't the worst either. In fact, they're actually pretty good for a laptop of this thing's size. I tried using the function keys to increase the brightness, but this didn't seem to be doing anything, so maybe it'll work when you get into an operating system, but I'm not really sure. It only took about a few minutes for that process to complete, however. They're not amazing, of course, but I'd be fine with them personally. I also tested the optical drive on this system. Not that I need to, it works fine. It's just kind of an average drive from back in the day. It's not the quickest drive I've ever seen, and is not particularly quiet, but it gets the job done, I guess. And speaking of drives, the SSD in this machine. Of course, it's being handicapped a little bit since this is such an old computer. I believe it's only SATA 2, not SATA 3. And this is kind of an old SSD, but these speeds still blow the old hard drive out of the water. And that was a hard drive that was pretty much brand new and still functioning at its best. Finally, of course, the games. This machine was never supposed to be a gaming laptop. That's not what it was marketed as, obviously. And the HD 3450 wasn't exactly a super high-end video card when it was new. However, after doing some very quick research, I did discover that this thing does still have comparable performance to the XPS M1530 that I reviewed back in April. So I did want to try some of my mid to late 2000s games on this computer since Steam still works for the time being. I don't really have a whole lot else to add to this footage, honestly. I will say that all these games that I tested on this system are decently playable on there. Occasionally some frame rate dips, but by turning the settings down, these games work just fine on this system. So just sit back and enjoy some footage of old games for a couple minutes, or skip ahead, I don't know. While I wouldn't say its performance is that different from the XPS, I should point out this thing's thermals are a lot better than the XPS. I didn't actually get thermals for that video, and I should have, because that thing ran pretty hot. This is pretty good considering I haven't repasted the CPU or gotten new thermal pads for that GPU at all. At least if any of these temperatures are anything to go by other than whatever this is. So honestly, I'm pretty impressed with this old laptop. I'm not the biggest fan of HP products in general, and I don't know how many other EliteBooks I will get anytime soon, but I think this thing's pretty good, to be honest. I was already going to keep it, especially considering the circumstances of how I got it in the first place, but this is a seriously capable old laptop, and there's not really a whole lot else I really need to do to it. I want to upgrade the RAM to 8GB, as far as I'm aware that's the most this system will take, and I want to get a new battery and CMOS battery for it, but outside of that, the CPU and GPU are good enough already, and this thing already has an SSD, so it's already pretty good. Probably one of the first one of these where I actually don't need to upgrade a whole lot of components to make it better. It's always nice when things are easy.